Tom.
So, uh, Ting's talk made me, uh, I think, and may seem like a very odd question, but um, you know, how big should my world be? And I'm thinking in particular about like that could be measured by how many people do I see on a weekly basis? How many people do I talk to on a weekly basis? How many in more normal times, how many times do I get on an airplane and travel, visit somewhere? How many friends do I have on social media? um, I don't know. I think that's it's a and I think in particular, I have there's a guy and his wife we used to be very close to back in the 80s, and after I moved to the Midwest in 1994, we really lost touch, and we kind of just recently found each other on Facebook, and we kind of said to each other, yeah, we should like Zoom and kind of catch up. It's been a long time, and but that was like 2 months ago, and we we haven't done it yet. So it makes me worried that I haven't you know haven't established what how big should my world be?
So, first of all, I'm always very interested when people say things like, this is really a strange question, or I don't know if this is a good question, or, this is a little off the wall. I think you said this is maybe an odd question or something like that. And one of the first things you learn when you teach mathematics is there's no such thing as a bad question. If someone has a question, then they deserve an answer, or they deserve a direction to face so they can find their own answer. So there's no, a question is just opening yourself up. So that happens to be a really wonderful question. And you can interpret it in many ways. When I first heard it, I didn't interpret it the way you later explained it. So I'm glad I didn't start answering it immediately and cutting you off.
I'd
Um,
be interested in your answer too.
Well, I was thinking in terms of the California wildfires, the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, the general political situation, all the stuff, the endless wars, the Brexit craziness. I mean, you look everywhere you look, something really strange and devastating is going on. And so I was thinking you were thinking of it in terms of activism, but you were thinking in terms of sort of normal daily life. And the two are not, in some sense, not that distinct. So, yeah, so, on the one hand, you have people who are surrounded, even in these times, they're surrounded by lots of people. There are people who go from one Zoom coffee to another Zoom lunch to another Zoom meeting to, meet in their backyards with like, 5 or 6 people at a time, go on, sort of spaced out walks with friends and spend a lot of time with other people. And then there are people doing long solo retreats, They're hermits in the mountains who have no obvious contact with other human beings except very briefly, occasionally, out of some kind of need. Um, so there's obviously no answer that I can give you about what you, Tom, should do. I mean, that'd be crazy, If I gave an answer like that, then you should never consider me a teacher, That'd be really awful. Um, but I think one thing to keep in mind is that this world is vast and wide. So even if you're a hermit on top of the highest mountain, getting your supplies for your 3 month solo retreat, and then going up that mountain and you don't see anybody because you've got your stash of toilet paper and you've got your stash of rice and you've got whatever you need for the 3 months, your world is vast and wide, not just the social world, but the world in itself is vast and wide, and the social world is not different from that world. So you see your life. You see how your life flows. You see what you do. A lot of times we say, oh, I don't have time to do that. And then you realize, like in my case, I realized how much time I spend on Facebook or, responding to emails that I don't really need to respond to. And yeah, I actually do have time for whatever it is that I think I don't have time for. Um, so you just look at your life and then you let things flow in and out of it. And the awkward thing you're talking about, where you discover somebody, say, "Oh my God, we've got to get together. We've got to get together. We've got to get." There's one woman at the Jewish Center. We've been saying this to each other for 10 years. We say, we've got to have lunch together. We don't say that anymore because of lockdown. We've got to have lunch together. It's never going to happen. We like each other, but it's not going to happen. That's okay. So yeah, so if your mind, let your mind be vast. You don't have to have anxiety over it. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to try to put it in some kind of, little box that tells you what to do. Just let your mind be vast and respond when you can respond. Respond when it's appropriate, and I don't mean it's appropriate up here. I mean respond when you can see that there's something to step into naturally. You don't have to ask this question then. Your question is really, how much should I be socializing? That's the form your question's taking. But even if you look at it, the way I'm looking at it, I first looked at it, which is in the light of all these really difficult things that are going on in this world. How should we respond? How big should we make our world in that sense? How much?
Yeah, very much. No, it's the same question. It's the same
Yeah. So
question.
yeah, how much? Many of us have many friends and family in California and Oregon and Washington State, and I don't know about you, but I see their photos on Facebook, and I hear their stories, and it's terrifying. And and then many of us, not so much very recently, but fairly recently, the opportunity to step forward for Black Lives Matter, to step forward and be part of sort of street political action. And then there are all the behind the scenes things of calling people about voting and stuff like that, which I've been trying to get involved in, but everything I try, it sort of doesn't quite work. I have to try something else. Um, what do we take in? What how vast can we make our world in the situation at this time? Ting has a friend who will be needing rides to doctors because when you go through chemo and stuff, you can't drive yourself home. They pump you full of all these drugs to uppers and downers to control side effects of nausea and things like that, and you just can't function for a couple of days afterwards. And Ting is in a situation where she can say, yes, I can do that for you, which is really wonderful that she can do that. Not all of us can do that. So when to see, just having your mind open and just really seeing where it is that you can step in, that you can do something, that you can allow other people to step into your life. And one of the things that I love about the Mahayana is it's sort of the opposite of Western individualism, because there's this sense that we really all are so intertwined that you don't have the responsibility to do everything. The way I was raised, you sort of felt responsible to, to deal with every kind of situation. You have to deal with racism, you have to deal with poverty, you have to deal with, bad wars. You have to deal with. When I was a kid, we had Bayside Students for Peace. We did demonstrations against the atom bomb. You know, um, and there was this feeling that I, as one person, have to do all of this, and it doesn't work that way. You can't. You're just one person. Even if you're the president of the United States, you still have a staff. You still have a whole lot of people doing stuff behind the scenes. You know, so nobody does everything by themselves. But when you have this spacious mind and you realize my job is to see what my job is. My job is to see where I can go, where I can step in. Where is my place to do something? And you don't do it from here. You do it from having this open mind, this don't know mind, where you don't have preconceptions about what you're supposed to do. You just have this really open mind, and then a situation appears and you can step into it. So yeah, the world is vast and wide. And then when Unmun said the world is vast and wide, he followed that by, why then do you put on the sevenfold robe? And the sevenfold robe is this, the little brown bib, this casa we call it, that is a sign of taking precepts. So it's a commitment to practice and to the path. I always hate that word. So why then did you take on this responsibility of this practice? So this world is vast and wide. Why then do you put on the sevenfold robe? Why do you take this responsibility? Why do you join this Sangha? So that's your question. And it's a wonderful, wonderful koan. And on a practical level, each of us answers this in our own way. But as far as the koan goes, the world is vast and wide. Why then do you put on the sevenfold robe? There's just one answer. And that one answer, when we have that answer, that points to the direction that we all need in seeing what there is for us to do. So thank you very much for your question. It was a wonderful question. Okay. And if you could mute yourself and we could have another question.
Hi, it's Jonathan.
Yeah.
I like the way you answered Tom's question by saying that there's no bad questions because it made me feel free to ask what I'm going to ask, which is about humor and Zen. Because it's like some of the stories, they have this kind of thing where you kind of laugh at it, and then also, or you don't understand, it seems bizarre and strange. You just kind of like, so you have that reaction to as to a joke. So I'm wondering if that's something that you would want to answer or not.
Well, you put your point, you put your finger on one of the real hallmarks of Zen. So a long, long time ago, long before I ever practiced Zen, back when I was a graduate student and living with a dope dealer. So this was a very long time ago. And somehow or other in some used bookstore in Berkeley, I came across this book called Zen for the West. And it was absolutely not Zen for the West. What it was it was basically explaining the schedule and practice in a Japanese Rinzai Zen monastery. So it's not Zen for the West at all. But I never really read this book because it wasn't very readable. But what I kept it and I looked at it a lot. And the reason I looked at it is because the the author's teacher was in the frontispiece, in you open the book and then you have a few blank pages and there's the title and then there's sometimes a picture. And instead of the author's picture was his teacher. And this guy had the biggest smile on his face. And he was just like, he was just laughing and laughing and laughing. And you never see Western clergy like that. When I was, when we were living at the Zen Center, we had a communal Zen Center at 1115 Ohio. Dennis Durmeyer was part of that crew, and so was Dick Hungston back when he was Jim Binger. And our son was, about 2 years old, and we were right behind the Episcopalian University ministry, or whatever they call themselves. They have a name, Saint something. And they had a back deck, and people would, these college kids would come out and pray on the back deck, and they'd be praying, like Christian style, like, I don't, probably not doing it very well, but this kind of thing. And our son's 2 years old, and he looked at me and says, "Are they in pain?" you know, and that's kind of like, Christian style. Jewish style is different. It's not this kind of thing. It's sort of like this kind of thing. You rock back and forth. But this like enormous smile, just like the whole universe is just hilarious, and not in a bad way. Like, wow, this is really great. I'd never seen that in anybody who was supposedly like a spiritual person. So I kept that book as a totem. I still have it somewhere in the house, just so every now and then I could open it and look at this guy's face. So and he's heir to a tradition. I mean, when you answer a bunch of kongans, after a while you begin to realize that there's this kind of, it's sort of like comedy, this kind of like the way things kind of slip and slide, and you're not constrained. This sort of the way language goes, like who's on first, that routine of, what is it, Abbott and Costello, and one of them is talking about first base, and the other's talking about, like, who's on first, who's on second. I mean, it's like there's the slipperiness of language is very clear, and the slipperiness of language, that's the heart of humor. And then also there's just this sort of joy that I guess we don't talk about enough. Well, you can't talk about it. You have to just manifest it. There's this joy. When you look at Myung-Hae Sinim's video that she made here, that joy is just so apparent. And Zen Master Sung-san, he was hilarious. I mean, he was like a stand-up comic. If you ever, there's a bunch of videos of him up on YouTube, and some of them are very hard to understand because the sound isn't that good, and his English wasn't that good. But, people are always laughing, and you read Compass of Zen, and there are all these parenthetical remarks. Audience laughs, It's like, he was just hilarious. And so this is like a really deep thing in the Zen tradition, is just to hold things lightly. And when you hold things lightly, then this humor and this joy can come, even when it's difficult. And it is difficult. Another very famous saying is, this world is an ocean of suffering, and it is. It's an ocean of suffering. And we're all in this ocean of suffering. And we can find joy in this ocean of suffering, which is not saying that the suffering doesn't exist. A lot of times when people say you should find your joy, and they're kind of like pretending that the suffering isn't there, like you're going to somehow overcome the suffering. You don't. They're absolutely entwined. They're just entwined. See, I'm double jointed. I can do that. They're completely entwined. Yeah, not many go like this, like that. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I'm double joining my fingers too. See that? And that. Anyway, so yeah, so that joy is very Zen. And you have those two crazy Chinese characters. I always forget. I think one of them is one of them Han Shan? I forget. One of those guys with the broom, and the other's a really fat guy, and they go around and they're always making jokes and doing pratfalls and stuff like that. That's another big thing. So this joy and this sense of humor and this lightness is definitely a very big part of Zen. So thank you for mentioning it and pointing it out, because these days we do get very serious. because it is pretty damn serious. But yeah, there's also joy. Yeah. And it is very funny. I mean, if we survive this, imagine what the stand up comics in 100 years are going to do when they're talking about us. Everyone will be rolling on the floor laughing because it's so completely absurd. So thank you for your question.
The answer.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Maybe just a short question
Mm-hmm.
that ties up what's been said so far. As you continue to practice and you become more aware, the other day I was talking in a circle. It's like entering a room and somebody turns on the light, and suddenly you see all the walls are painted, and you say, well, I didn't know I was like that. And there is a certain pain in the process of self-awareness and of discovery, but there's also a reward, or there's also a way out of that suffering. So if, in light of what you were commenting about how big your social circle or your activism circle should be, and talking about comedy, um, what would you say? How do we get past that pain of becoming aware of certain things that maybe you don't like about yourself, or you weren't even aware that you had certain characteristics? And when I say you or I mean the small I that
Yeah.
works in the day-to-day life.
Yeah, so that's habit, that's karma, that's the small I, which means that it's not real. We make it. And if you don't see it, then it's running your life. You have to see it in order for it not to run your life. That's very important. So when this painful stuff, this difficult stuff arises, and it can be very hard to look at it. And a lot of times our mind tries to fix it. We obsess about it. We try to fix it, whatever it is. Let that go. Just let it go. Just there it is. And you can look at it, but don't stare at it. Just look at it. Bring your mind back to your practice. Then it loses its hold. That's why we keep saying, bring your mind back, bring your mind back, bring your mind back. Because that's how it loses its hold. And then, yeah, it may keep coming up, it may keep coming up, it may keep coming up, but it no longer has power over you. So that's the point. It's not to make our suffering go away, because we can use the suffering to help other people. Everyone knows, something happens to you, it's really awful, you manage to get through it, and then something similar happens to a friend of yours. And then you can help them in a way that other people can't because you've been through it. So the point is not to not suffer. The point is, how do you use the suffering and to not have the suffering control you? Because what we usually do is we let our suffering control us. And there's no need for that. So yeah, it comes up, it's just what it is. And just let it be. So that's the Zen approach. Sometimes, and Margaret's a social worker, so she professionally knows what I'm talking about. Sometimes people have terrible, terrible trauma, and they really have to look at it and analyze it in a certain way and go through certain things. They can't just simply, go back to their practice. It seizes them so hard, by the back of the neck, seizes them so hard that it takes a lot of work, a different kind of work, to be able to free themselves from it. And I think nobody here is 5 years old, so everybody here has gone through something. like that. There's been some kind of experience that was really difficult and was really, really hard to come through in a way. But when you're practicing and this stuff comes up, then your job is to just go back to your practice. And then it begins to lose its power. And if something really has power over you and you simply can't, well, it won't let go of you and you won't let go of it. If that happens, then you need to find some kind of professional help. Someone like a psychotherapist or a social worker, somebody who knows techniques that can help you get to the point where it no longer runs your life. But as far as Zen practice goes, our technique is very simple. Something comes up and you just bring back to your practice. You don't even tell it to go away because it might stay there. That's okay. You just bring your mind back to your practice. So not everyone here knows the story of how I became sane. So I should tell this story. So when I was a kid, I guess the word back then was neurotic. They don't use that word anymore, but I didn't have a break with reality. I wasn't psychotic, but I was very angry and disturbed and didn't get along with people, and I was just a mess. And I went to shrink after shrink after shrink, starting when I was 15, and none of them could help me because they were all talk therapy, and I was clever, which meant I was really stupid, which meant that I would run intellectual rings around them as a way of avoiding whatever it was that they were trying to get me to do, and they couldn't break through. And then finally I ran into a Gestalt therapist when I was almost 30, my late 20s. And because Gestalt, you don't talk, you enact, So like I came in once, I said, I remember a dream. I never remember dreams. I remember a dream. I remember a dream. And she says, oh, tell me your dream. I said, oh, I'm walking on a road. And she says, well, what is it like to be the road? I'm saying, Milla, that's not the point of the dream. And she says, tell me, what's it like to be the road? And I said, okay, it's asphalt. It's gray. Everybody walks on me. Nobody notices me. Nobody. And I'm starting crying. So that's Gestalt. Gestalt just cuts through because it doesn't work on a verbal level. And Richard Schrobe, Zen Master Wukwang in New York City, he's a Gestalt therapist. And I tell him stories about my Gestalt therapist 40 years ago, and he just cracks up because I think it's so special. He says, I do that 10 times a day. But anyway, so she managed to break through. And gradually I began to see, these things, and they began to lose their power over me. And then one day I looked at her and I said, I don't have to be this way, do I? And she said, no, you don't. And you ever see a tornado disappear, like it's sucked up into the clouds? And it was like that. It just, all the distortion in my mind got sucked up into it was gone. It was just completely gone. And it was after that I started practicing Zen. So I can't say that Zen helped me because it was after that. I was meditating. I was meditating like to save my life, I was desperate. But it wasn't Zen meditation. I wasn't with a Sangha. I couldn't be with a Sangha until I had come through that. If I'd been with a Sangha, I would have just messed it up. They would have told me, you have to leave because you're impossible, So I'm a great believer if you need therapy to get therapy. I have no evidence that anyone here needs it. It's just a general statement. I have great respect for it, and it certainly saved my life. Zen is a different approach. The Zen approach is it comes up and you let it be and you just bring your mind back. So that's the Zen approach. So, yeah. And you go through your whole life, this stuff always, it never goes away, but that's okay, because how do you use it? If we never suffered, we could never help anyone. That's just a fact. You see little toddlers comforting each other. Have you ever seen, it's so cute when a little toddler goes up to comfort another little toddler, and they'll put their arm around them, pre-COVID, of course. They'll put their arm around them, maybe give them a toy, something like that. How can they do that? They can do that because they've suffered. They understand, or they think they understand. They have some idea of what this other little kid is going through. And they know what comforts them. A hug or a toy or ice cream or whatever. So that's, suffering in that sense, even though it feels awful at the time, in some sense it's a gift because it's what allows us to help each other. So just let it be and just bring your mind back to your practice. And then use that suffering to help others. So, thank you for your question, Max. Are there any other questions? It's kind of time to start sitting again. Let's see. I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to start sitting.